It is finally warming up, so we are diving into the art of container gardening today. How to craft beautiful, thriving planters that bring personality and charm to your home throughout the spring and summer seasons. Joining me is Steph Green, founder of Contained Creations. Steph started her business in 2013, turning her passion for gardening into a sought-after bespoke service for clients in Richmond, Virginia. Over the years, she has planted thousands of pots, tested endless combinations, and is an expert in designing stunning seasonal planters. Now she is on a mission to share her expertise with all of us through courses, guides, her very popular Instagram channel, and today's conversation. So in this conversation, we are talking about how to curate planters like a pro, everything from selecting the right plants and colors to ensuring they thrive through the heat of wherever you're located this summer, what kind of planter to use for a grand entryway, a charming window box. I personally walked away from this conversation with so much inspiration and ideas were swirling in my mind. So I know that Steph's advice today will help you to create a show-stopping display. Welcome to Grandma Silver, where tradition meets today. I'm Allie, your host of the Grandma Silver podcast and founder of the Grand Millennial Lifestyle. Here, we blend aesthetics with nostalgia, engaging in conversations with lifestyle brands, designers, and more to rediscover the timeless charm of the past. Join me as we journey from home to heart, illuminating the past and polishing the present with the gleam of Grandma Silver. Well, Steph, welcome to the Grandma Silver podcast. I'm super excited to chat today, not only because I think you and I have a lot of similarities and I think this conversation will be super interesting, but also because this conversation means warm weather is coming, which is always fun to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's exciting to start talking about this time of year for sure.
Absolutely. Well, before I ask all the questions, I'd like to just give you a second to introduce yourself, tell people who you are, about your brand, and we'll go from there.
So I'm Steph Green. My company is Contained Creations. I'm based out of Richmond, Virginia, but I'm originally from Morristown, New Jersey. I came to Richmond for college and have been here ever since. I actually have a background in business. So I was learning marketing and finance in college and then first couple of jobs outside of school, and then stayed home to raise our kids. And then when our youngest was about to enter elementary school, I started thinking about how I might be able to spend some of my time while the kids were in school. And I had always been kind of loved yard work, loved dabbling in the garden, loved doing pots for our home, and started doing that for friends. It just kind of grew into a thing. I started helping some friends and then their friends just through word of mouth. The business kind of blossomed and I started doing it as a service and, incorporated and basically grew the business into a custom container gardening business. I did installations and maintenance for clients for about 10 years.
Wow.
And then in 2022, I had decided it was time for a change. It is physically demanding work. And I think intellectually, I wanted to do something a little bit different too. I basically shut down the client side of the business and stopped doing installations, which was heartbreaking, but I like to think it was kind of a brave move. And I really took the business online and focused more on education and inspiration and teaching other people how to make their own beautiful container gardens. And so now I have a website, containedcreations.com. I offer a library of seasonal courses in container gardening, which are all pre-recorded video based. You go at your own pace. I offer planter recipes. So if you're maybe ready to get your hands in the dirt, but just need some new inspiration, you can see some of the things that I've done in the past and see the whole plant map for those. I have a blog, I have an Instagram. I have tons of ways that I like to continue to share my passion for container gardening and help other people do it too.
I love it. And I will just throw this out here now that I will provide links to all of the things that you just mentioned in the show notes. So we'll make it nice and easy for people to find everything that you just mentioned, plus anything that comes up later in our conversation. It'll all be linked there. So easy to grab.
Thank you.
Yeah. If we look at like the world of gardening or even like landscaping there, it's so vast.
Mhm.
How did you decide to specialize in containers?
Yeah, I mean, I think because it's so easy. Container gardens are so flexible. You don't need a lot of space. You can have, 5 acres or 5 square feet on a front
Yeah.
entrance. You can move them. You can be fickle. You can change your mind. You can change them from season to season, from year to year. You can change your color palettes. You could do an evergreen that stays in there year round, or you could do a completely fresh change out every season. I feel like I was able to learn to experiment and not be afraid to experiment because it was just maybe one pot or just a pair of pots on my front porch. It didn't feel like I was making a massive investment in a landscape,
Right.
right? You're just focusing on a handful of plants. And so it was less intimidating. It was also easier because, if you have issues like limited sun exposure or too much sun or deer, rabbits, things like that, all these different obstacles that can impact your ability to garden successfully, you can kind of put your pots in the ideal location on your site. You can keep them out of reach from the deer. You can keep them up on a patio. You can keep them on a high window box. Very few barriers to entry. And I think that's probably the primary reason I went so deep into containers.
I love that. And you just, because one of my later questions for you was sort of, well, what are the advantages, right, of container gardening versus perhaps traditional gardening? You just named, I don't even know how many. That was a lot of, I mean, those are all good reasons. And like you said, it feels like less of a commitment. I think that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of the perfect little classroom. I mean, you don't have to start off with 20 pots. I had clients who had 20 to 30 pots, and those were massive, massive undertakings. But you can have one, two, even six planters that are, I would say do fewer, but make them really good and really learn in those, learn with those, learn what plants do well in different locations on your property, learn what type of fertilizer makes them bloom more or makes them happiest, learn how often you need to water things. What's deadheading? What's the best way to pluck off the deadhead? Why do I need to do this? All these little things you can just sort of learn how to garden on a small scale.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden you might think, oh, well, I have this little bed over here next to a bench. Maybe I could try, I always talk about thrillers, fillers, and spillers when I do container gardens. And thriller is sort of your tallest piece in the arrangement, and it sets the tone for kind of the silhouette and the height. And then you have fillers, which kind of fill in that middle tier. And then you have your spillers or the plants that cascade over the edge of the pot. And once you kind of master that in a pot, you can start to see how that translates into the landscape as well. So you want something tall, you want something mid-tier, and then you want something low. So it really is a great classroom, a great place for you to learn how to garden if you're new to it.
Now, I have a personal vested interest in this conversation because I find myself being more of a vegetable gardener
Hmm.
with some flowers around the yard. I'm actually not great so far. This will change this summer, right? But with container gardening, because I feel like I often spend so much of my energy researching, okay, like what do I put around the vegetables? What do I put on the landscape? That it's almost more challenging to figure out, well, hold on, because those things are often also really large. They're
Hmm.
more like shrubs or things that will take up a lot more space because that's what those needs are.
Hmm.
Struggle to figure out, okay, how do I condense this and still make it fit the general aesthetic of our space? That said, you touched on a couple of things like window boxes, pots on the patio or on the porch. So I would love to kind of talk through location for a minute because I have to imagine that that changes what your approach might be or what you're looking for to put into the container.
I like to think of placement is pretty key because you want to sort of depends on what your goal is. My goal is curb appeal and welcome home.
Hmm.
So I typically want, neighbors, guests, passersby, everybody walking their dog down my cul-de-sac. I like the idea of them seeing something that takes their breath away or makes them laugh. I mean, people think my window boxes, we have 3 window boxes on the front of our house, all in a row, that's sort of on the outside of our garage. And it's kind of closest to the street. And so people see those and they're in front of really tall windows. And so just for proper scale and proportion, I make those arrangements really tall.
Oh, how
And
fun.
people are like, how did you do that? Like, I never ever would have thought of making a window box centerpiece be 4 feet tall. So I'm always thinking about who's going to enjoy them and where I'm going to get the most bang for my buck. So for me, I have, window boxes that are kind of close to the street and then a front entrance. I always want somebody to have something at their front entrance. But I'm also thinking about, the garage. Frankly, while my guests may come to the front door, I pull into the garage every day. And so I like having something pretty there to welcome me there. But maybe if you're nervous or you haven't done this before, then pick something more discreet where maybe every guest isn't going to see it or where
Mhm.
you can, if you don't have time to take care of it and it dies in the summer and it looks brown, like you can either move it or just have it somewhere where it's not so prominent. So I think about traffic areas, visibility, as well as kind of experience level of who's doing the container gardening. So that's how I talk about placement. And then I also think about in terms of what goes into each of those pots, I've got to think about kind of accessibility. Can I reach these things? Are these flowers going to need to be deadheaded to keep looking good? Or can they kind of stand on their own? Because if it's a high window box and I can't reach it, I'm not going to be able to get to it once every week or two, not easily, to take
Mhm.
care of it versus something that's really easy to reach right on the ground that I
Yeah.
can keep an eye on, keep a close eye on. And you have to think about your experience level, right? So if somebody is just starting with container gardens, flank your front entrance with 2 ferns. If you have a lot of sun, use a Kimberly Queen fern. If you have a lot of shade, use a Boston fern or an Autumn Brilliance fern, or a macho fern. But I feel like ferns are like container gardening 101. Try it,
Okay.
right? And actually plant it in your pot. Just don't take the plastic pot from the garden center and sit it in your metal urn flanking your front or urns flanking your front door. Like actually plant it. Get in there, get your hands in there, see how much this thing is going to grow, see how much better it's going to retain water when actually planted into a pot versus just plopped in its plastic pot. Start learning and then branch out. Then maybe try a smaller fern next year and put something else next to it. Put some begonias in with it. Put something trailing in there. So just kind of learn and build on it.
You mentioned like an urn by the front door. How does the container need change based on location or even what someone might want to put into it?
Don't overcomplicate it.
Okay.
First of all, don't overcomplicate it. A lot of the success in container gardening for many people comes from trial and error because every environment is unique. Everybody's interpretation of keeping the soil evenly moist is different. Some people are heavier handed with water or pruning. Some people just forget they have pots. So every situation is unique. So I would just say don't overcomplicate it. Don't get paralyzed by having the perfect thing all the time. I just published it this week, a brand new free guide. So when you subscribe to my newsletter, you get this guide and it's called the Planter Shopping Guide.
Oh,
And
perfect.
I know it's amazing, amazing
Serendipitous.
coincidence. The goal of this guide is to show you a very simple formula that I always use for particularly when I'm addressing a front door or a back door, any outdoor space where you have kind of defined parameters. So maybe a portico or a covered porch, maybe side lights next to a front door, that kind of situation. The simple idea is you take the height of your space. So from your porch up to the top of your door, divide it by three. The bottom third is how tall your pot should be. The middle third is how tall your plants should be when they're mature. And then the top third, leave that open. Maybe you have some lanterns next to your front door, but just visually, it's good to have no weight up there. You just kind of want a visual rest, a visual break up top. And once you start to think of your space in horizontal thirds or bands, then you get the right scale. Because a lot of people I see a common mistake is their pots are too small.
Hmm.
And when your pots are too small, the plants can only be so big. And
Right.
so you end up with these little shrimpy, they could be adorable, but they kind of look silly because they're not properly framing the space that you're trying to address. So anyway, so if you sign up for my newsletter right now on my website, you get the planter shopping guide and it maps this out for you more clearly.
Awesome.
And it also includes links to a ton of beautiful planters, some of my favorite retailers that I like. So you can kind of click around and start shopping. That's when you're kind of ready to dig in deep. The most important message is get the scale of your pot right, and then get the scale of your plants to the pots right. And that visually will make all the difference.
Okay. Well, I love that you're touching on scale because being a little more design minded, I often think about how, like my plants, I'll think about my home's exterior. I was curious if you're looking at that too. So, colors of a property, the style of the property, if it's more, cottagey, if it's traditional.
100%. In many cases, clients might already have their own set of pots. So if there are listeners out there who are like, well, I don't have the budget to buy new pots right now. I like these work for me. Great. I am not advocating that people go out and clean house and start all over with new pots. But if you are thinking about new pots or you're thinking about replacing something or you're thinking about adding something to your collection, think about the style of your home. So think about the pot almost as an extension of your architecture. If you have a craftsman style home, I would recommend something kind of simple, clean lines, maybe boxy or maybe very simple curves. I wouldn't go with like an ornate iron urn. That would fit more with a traditional space. So I would definitely just keep that in mind as you're shopping. And likewise, when you're thinking about plants, if you have a super contemporary home, there are lots of very sculptural plants you can use. There's like Sansevieria and succulents, maybe a very simple arrangement, something like, I call them like one plant pots. So you just pick one gorgeous specimen, whatever it is, but that is the only thing that you plant in that pot, whether it's a cluster of a bunch of them or it's just one big one. Keep it very clean and simple, contemporary. If you're more on that traditional side, I think the thriller, filler, spiller approach is a really good one for you. You can kind of, it's pretty flexible. You could still do, something very tropical or something very whimsical. I think the biggest divide is really if you are more on the traditional craftsman cottage side versus if you're on like mid-century modern or contemporary side. I like
Yeah.
to think about the shape of the pot that's ideal for each of those places, and then what type of planting would go in them.
And then what about if people have existing landscaping? So I'm thinking, well, cottages in particular are probably, in my mind anyway, not necessarily more of a challenge, but I think because they tend to just be more whimsical and there's just so much, they're like overabundant
Hmm.
that I don't know how you incorporate a planter into that, but then also I'm thinking about a lot of properties have like hydrangeas that line the front. Are you using smaller versions of existing things in these containers for consistency? Are you going with color palettes? What is your process there?
The needs of the container gardens are going to kind of depend on the space, where the pots are located. And, part of that is just personal preference, right? So for some people, more is more. I want black-eyed Susans everywhere. I want flowers blooming every week, something new coming up. Then you just continue that right up to the containers. But sometimes if you have a lot going on in the landscape, you just need a visual break when you get up to that front door or you round that corner to the patio. And maybe it's just, like I said earlier, just one plant per pot. So we are carrying the greenery up closer to the house and softening the hardscape, so to speak.
Mhm.
But you don't necessarily have to match the complexity of what's in the landscape. So maybe there's a single hydrangea up on the porch when you've got all those hydrangea down in the garden beds. Or maybe there's just a subtle repetition of color. So maybe you love pale pink. Maybe your front yard has this gorgeous bed of soft blush pink roses, but then you're moving up onto the covered front porch and it's shady. We're not going to be able to grow roses there, but maybe we can grow an impatient or some double impatiens that repeat that soft pink. Or maybe there's a begonia that would work up there. So subtle repetition really goes a long way. And again, I come back to ferns. I love ferns. I think if you had a really sweet cottage garden with a lot going on, you could just have two very simple, very lush, that beautiful, like kind of fountain, soft, arching habit would be kind of, to me, feels very sweet, very nostalgic, very kind of like, rural covered front porch,
Mhm.
um, without competing with everything that you have going in the garden.
I'm also thinking because we're talking about entries quite a bit and kind of that curb appeal or that like that wow factor, right? Like that thing
Yeah.
that you see. Do you have any tips for people who are maybe in an apartment or a condo who really don't have that front entry, but maybe they have a balcony that they want to make an impact on or something, still have the opportunity to play around with all of this?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll preface this by saying, please know what your requirements or restrictions are where you live because, when you're watering things, excess water is ideally draining out. It could be going to a neighbor below you. There could be weight restrictions, things like that. So just please, I would encourage anybody who's trying to outfit a balcony like that to consider what restrictions they might have. But there are so many cool, very lightweight planters on the market now. There are some that have what's called a false bottom. So it might be a tall, narrow container, but there's actually a shelf built in maybe two-thirds of the way up. So you aren't filling that entire thing with potting mix that then is going to get wet and super heavy. You're just kind of focused on the planting area that you have up in that top third. That's where your roots can go. So check out some of the lightweight. There are a lot of fiberglass composites that are inexpensive to ship, or if you pick them up at a store, they're easy for you to carry up a couple flights of stairs without breaking your back. If you need to empty them for the winter season, they're very manageable and very
Yeah.
accessible. There are also some really cool railing planters available now. So I know companies like Veridec, Hooks and Lattice is another great one. They actually they're essentially window boxes, but there's hardware that you can buy with them that is meant to hang over the railing of like a deck or a balcony. You kind of have to read carefully to make sure that hardware is going to fit over whatever it is that you have. But that's kind of an amazing way to not take up any valuable floor space,
Mhm.
but still dabble in gardens. And if you have enough sunlight, you could probably grow some edibles, some herb gardening in that type of a space would be amazing. Or you can just go all out with flowers or foliage, whatever types of plants bring you joy, frankly, and will thrive in the lighting conditions that you have. But lots of really cool options there. And hanging baskets too. I mean, again, the spirit of not taking up valuable floor space
Hmm.
is what I would really encourage people to think about is getting planters that are up high, hanging on a railing, hanging from the ceiling. Even you can get hooks that you can install into the wall and then hang a hanging basket from there. So lots of ways for everybody to dabble in this stuff.
I love that. And it's funny, as you're saying, hanging baskets, I feel like I have every year. I try so hard to do these hanging baskets on our porch. And every year, without fail, there is at least one where a bird makes its nest. We do love our birds around here, so I don't ever want to do anything. That one just dies because we let them grow and, live their lives in there. That is always our springtime
It's
experience.
a challenge, and I have some big plans for hanging baskets on we have a covered porch on the back of our house, and I have
Okay.
big plans for hanging baskets out there. My plan is to, because we also end up with the birds, and we do love the birds, but that's a pretty high traffic area. And the
It's
same thing
hard.
happens on a front porch. Like they'll get spooked and come flying out at you
Yes.
when you're coming home. So it's a little scary sometimes.
Yes.
But my thought is there are some products that you can get. It's basically like critter control. And so
Okay.
it's a granular product. To me, it smells like everything bagel seasoning. I don't know if that's my Jersey roots coming out, but I think there's probably some, there are definitely some stinky things in there that deter squirrels, birds, bunnies from kind of burrowing. It just makes things a little less attractive. So my plan is to use some of that in the hanging baskets and see what happens.
Yeah. Well,
Crossing my fingers.
you've just brought up another critter, which is the squirrels, which I have been needing to put little fencing around our baskets until things get more established because the squirrels have been out of control. Are you waiting until things are more established to plant them?
Because what I'm doing is, I mean, it's ornamental. I
Yeah.
do very little to no edibles. I'm kind of all about instant gratification. So,
We love that.
so on day one, even though I want my planters to, thrive and grow, kind of grow into the design that I have envisioned, I still like them to look pretty amazing on day one. So pretty full. You're not seeing soil really when I plant. I'm
Okay.
planting root ball to root ball. I don't know that that really is inviting or deterring critters
Hmm.
from messing around. I think no matter how you're planting, whether you're going from seed or whether you're going, from fairly established summer annuals from a garden center, if you know that critters are a risk, I would say give a sprinkle on top of your potting mix before you put your plants in or right after you do, and just get a decent coating, follow the directions, but get a decent coating on that soil. And you probably want to go back in every couple of weeks and add more just in case.
What is your approach, or do you have recommendations for plants that work for people depending on where they are on the spectrum of level of comfort, time, resources? So there are some listening who may be ready and willing to go in every couple of months, spring through the end of summer and change their containers out. And there are others who want a one and done situation. So they'll go in, they'll mulch, they'll put their containers out, and they just want to water them and have very low maintenance. So do you have
Mhm.
different recommendations for things based on what people might be looking for in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And keep in mind this varies, the plant selection and longevity and how much they're going to thrive depends greatly on your region.
Hmm.
So, I'm in zone 7B right now, and we used to be 7A, and we're warming up. So I'm now in 7B. And even, there can be 7B across the country, but, the time of year when I hit my coldest temperatures and highest temperatures might be different from 7Bs across the country. So I encourage everybody to, kind of find a local garden center, maybe somebody at that local garden center where you can ask questions about things like what's going to do well here in a pot, what's going to last the longest in this type of location, because shade in Texas in July is hotter than shade in Virginia in July. I love to recommend that. I don't want people to feel intimidated. Hopefully, garden centers, most garden centers have people who are really willing to help or get on the walkie-talkie and ask someone who can. Don't be afraid to ask questions. They work at a garden center because they love plants in most instances, so they're going to want to help you. There are so many ways to approach container gardens. If you just want something that's going to live in a pot for 2 years, I would pick a slow growing dwarf or very small evergreen plant. So an evergreen is something that basically stays green year round. They can either be conifers or broadleaf. A conifer is anything that grows cones and is kind of needly. A lot of people feel like those are very Christmassy, so they may steer away from them. But I use things like dwarf Alberta spruce in container gardens all the time, and I dress them up with lovely seasonal annuals at the base. And they're a great beginner plant. They are tough. They're pretty low maintenance. You just need to water them and kind of shower them to keep any mites off. That's kind of the perfect example of a slow growing, low maintenance plant that's fairly universal. I think you can get those in most places in the country. There are also broadleaf evergreens, things that have smoother leaves. So there could be holly, a boxwood, a camellia, a variety of shapes of leaves, but look for something that is either really small when you start in your pot or is considered a dwarf or a really petite variety. I love green mountain boxwood. They have a kind of a fat pyramidal shape, which works really nicely, gives you kind of a nice clean look in a pot. Green velvet boxwood or a spherical or a ball shaped boxwood, pretty slow growing in pots. Those are some of my favorites that I use for when somebody's like, I just want green. I don't want to deal with flowers. So those are great options. I would say 2 years is about the most you're going to get out of any of those in a pot. Some people have great luck and they stay in there forever. Maybe they started with a really massive pot, and so the evergreens have a chance to grow into those. But generally, when I'm using evergreens in container gardens, I'm thinking they're going to last all 4 seasons, maybe a second year behind that. But after that, generally they're growing out of proportion to the pot, and
Right.
I don't want them to look too big for the pot that I've put them in. So I like to move them to the landscape if they're still healthy. I give them away. I go through so many plants. I honestly will post on Facebook if I do like a big pot clean out. And I used to do this for client when I had clients too. If they didn't want the plants and it was time to change them out for something or just a seasonal change out, Allie, literally, I would like bring the stuff home in my box truck and display it at my curb, take a picture of it and put it on Facebook and say
Wow.
free plants.
That's my dream.
And they'd be gone in a couple of hours.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so they get a new home, and some people would bring them inside, use them outside, whatever, but you don't have to throw them away. There's a place for them somewhere. There's one man's trash, right?
Yes.
That's kind of how I like to approach somebody who wants something long term. You've got to have an evergreen, unless you may live somewhere considerably warmer where you might be able to do something a little bit more deciduous. But most plants need that period of dormancy to rest, kind of like re-energize for the following year. When you're experimenting, you want to look for something that really looks the way you want it to look for all 4 seasons.
Okay. I know you mentioned you are more ornamental. You didn't incorporate as many edible, items, but I often will see containers where there are physical objects integrated. Do you have tips for people who have little garden tchotchkes that they want to mix in, or if they have something that perhaps climbs, how you plan ahead to help it to thrive and do what it
Mhm.
needs to do in a container?
Yeah, so to address the tchotchkes first, I feel like those are best enjoyed in a container garden that is eye level or something that maybe it's like something on the ground in the corner of the patio where you're very likely to look down, like at the base of a step, so that you see it.
Right.
And keep in mind it's going to take up space. So anything that you put in that pot that is not growing is taking up some of the room where the other plants were going to be growing. But I love a stone bunny. I had a client who had the cutest little stone turtle next to this big urn by her pool. So I love all of those little touches of whimsy. I would just keep in mind, like, make sure you're going to see it wherever you
Yeah.
put it. In terms of climbing, I have some great hacks for you. So, some of the plants that I love to use in summer containers are mandevilla. So, I use a ton of mandevilla, and then dipladenia is the considered the shrub form of mandevilla. It's not as, it will climb a little bit, but it's a little more of kind of a loosey, moundy kind of growth habit. For the mandevilla, you typically will buy those, and if you get one in like a 6 or 8 inch pot, it probably comes with that like little upside down
Yeah.
U-shaped hoop. It's like a bamboo hoop. I love to give those plants a much taller place to grow. So at this point, I have, I don't know, dozens of bamboo stakes in my garage. But you can buy a pack of these at any big box store. Buy a pack of maybe 3 to 4 foot bamboo stakes. Let's say you have a round pot. Take 3 of those stakes and just put them at, like, if you're looking over the pot and it's like a clock, put one at 12 o'clock, one at 4 o'clock, and one at 8 o'clock, and just let them stick out of your pot. And then grab them. They have some flexibility to them. Grab them and together. So all 3 of them are touching together, and you've almost made like a tripod or a
Hmm.
teepee for your pot. And then you can zip tie that. And then if you don't want to see the zip tie, you could take some twine, wrap the twine around it, kind of disguise it. And there you've just made yourself a really inexpensive framework for your climbing vines to grow all summer long. And
Okay.
the way I plant that is depending on the size of the pot I'm using, I could use, 1 or maybe 3 of those smaller mandevilla plants. You don't even have to take them off of their individual trellises that they come on. You can leave them in. Just plant them like you would any other annual. But maybe if there are some loose tendrils, you can take them and just like start to coax them up that bamboo that you gave it. You'll be amazed in a couple of weeks how vigorously those vines will start to climb and cover your trellis that you've made. It's such a great cheat for achieving height in a container garden, right? So if you have a big
Yeah.
front door, but maybe not a lot of space for a big enough pot, you can kind of put one mandevilla in there and you just tell it to go up and it goes.
I
So
love that. Yeah, I love climbers. I think they're just so fun, but it is a challenge to, again, being someone who does more on the vegetable flower garden side, to
mhm.
visualize what that looks like in a container. So that's very helpful. Understanding there's trends in interiors, there's also those trends in exterior. What would someone do if they wanted to approach their containers with some of these in mind, or especially if they don't have these other gardens to pull from or use as inspiration, and the container is their starting point?
I love this, both interior design and exterior design trend of this like return to nostalgia. So, cottage core design, cottage gardens, kind of that aesthetic of kind of a simpler time, a rural lifestyle. That can come through in your container gardens in whatever way, whatever is nostalgic to you, right? So, maybe if you used to walk your grandparents' yard and pick green beans and zucchini, maybe you're more of an edibles kind of person. And so your nostalgic container gardens maybe are more focused on, herbs and veggies. Whereas, other people might be very flower forward. So they might be thinking about, grandma's hydrangeas at the beach or her rose garden. I mean, gosh, peonies. I wouldn't really grow peonies in containers because they're so short-lived. But for me, I think of like a lot of sweet flowers like snapdragons, dianthus, the roses for sure. Just anything that gives you that sort of the memories of going back to your childhood, doing things with your mom, doing things with your grandparents, doing things with your dad. It doesn't just have to be moms, but yeah, I think there's definitely a way to bring that feeling into a container garden. I would follow that thriller, filler, spiller approach. If you just have one pot and, pick something kind of tall, then pick something middle tier, and then pick something sweet that's trailing, whether it's, maybe it's ivy or maybe it's like a trailing flower in the shade, like a terrania. Or you could also get this look, and this lends itself well to like edible gardening, is do a cluster of pots and feature one specimen in each one. So if you're doing vegetables and, you have the proper lighting conditions, do a different variety in each pot and cluster those together. Maybe they're as you round the path to the backyard, you've got a little cluster of these pots. And you could do the same thing with beautiful flowers too. You could have a tall, a medium, and a small pot. So instead of having a thriller, filler, spiller in one pot, you have three pots, one for the thriller, one for the filler, and one for the spiller. So, and then just pick a different variety for each pot. So yeah, there's lots of creative ways to kind of get that feeling and evoke that sense of time has gone by, that classic look. And it can be a little bit different for everybody. It's very personal.
Well, I was also, this is, I'm veering kind of off topic here. You mentioned something that I didn't want to forget about earlier, which was deadheading. And I
Hmm.
think most people know what that reference is and what that entails, but I was hoping you could just explain it for those who might not. And then also, and this might be too technical or like plant-based, but is there a strategy to knowing when you're supposed to do that?
Okay, super easy. So deadheading is the process of just removing any what I would call spent flower heads from the plant. And by doing that, you're signaling to the plant, to its root system, to its interior biomechanics to stop sending energy to that flower and instead start sending energy to other flowers and to new blooms. So when you see a flower on an annual, on a perennial, and it is faded. Maybe it's drooping, maybe it is turning brown, maybe the leaves are kind of the edges of the petals, kind of turning that caramel color. It's time to deadhead it. And the simplest way to do that is to just you can snap it off with your fingers. I like to use either just regular household scissors or little pruning garden snips, not that your heavy duty pruning shears, but just little snips with straight blades. You get a nice clean cut so the plant will seal itself off and you won't end up, you don't want to damage it too much. You don't want to get insects and diseases and fungus growing inside there, but just a nice clean cut. You just want to cut above a leaf node. So if you have your flower, you have a stem, and then it comes down to the first time that leaves are branching out, you want to cut the stem right above those. It looks better and it will just encourage more full growth. I believe with roses, you actually want to go down a little bit further and you want to cut at a place where you've got five leaves coming out. So you have a branch with five leaves. That's going to tell you exactly where to deadhead a rose. And that might technically be more pruning than deadheading. Pruning I think of as being more like overall plant maintenance and shaping. Deadheading is really just to get rid of the ugly stuff and to encourage more blooms.
Thank you. I will say when I first started gardening and even especially my containers, but addressing pruning separately, that was a whole other lesson. But I didn't know what I didn't know. I thought they just fell off on their own and then new ones come in, and often that will happen, but you get so
Mhm.
much more life out of it when you do deadhead. So
Yeah, there are
yeah.
definitely some plants. I always encourage folks to read the plant tags when they're shopping, not only for ideal growing conditions, sun, shade, water, things like that, but also to understand how they're going to need to be maintained. So some plants are kind of most really self-deadheading, and that means that they will really shed their own flowers. You don't need to go in and pluck those off. But even though it's self-deadheading, I find that those plants like mini begonias, mini impatiens, New Guinea impatiens, sun patiens, while you technically don't need to deadhead them, they really benefit from rain or like a gentle shower with the hose to kind of help them shed the dead petals. And it looks so much better. Just that little extra step goes a long way.
Yeah. I have two more questions for you. One of which is just thinking about, again, setting that pot up for success. Do you use any particular potting soil, or does that matter? Like, does it matter based on location or what you're putting into it? Or can you use like just a general potting soil? I mean, they have so many now, and honestly, it's a little confusing. I don't know what any of the labels mean, why that would be helpful.
Yeah, you definitely want potting mix. So potting mix is actually an engineered product meant to kind of be a medium in which your plants can grow, but it's not, I don't even know that there's actually like quote unquote dirt in potting mix. So it's kind of this engineered material that is created to drain really well, to be in a confined, compacted space. So you don't ever want to use something called garden soil, planting mix. Go for something with the word potting in it. In terms of brands, in my courses and as an educator, I'm really focused on making this stuff easy, accessible, low barriers to entry for people. In that spirit, I feel like things like Miracle Grow potting mix and Miracle Grow fertilizers are just hands down the most readily available products. And I have used them and used them for years with really nice results. And so I feel very comfortable teaching that and recommending that. That said, I do feel like there are more specific fertilizers that you can use. Like if you have a very flower forward arrangement, you can get what's called a bloom booster fertilizer. So there are a couple different brands out there that you can look for. But if you are really focused on blooms and not just foliage growth, make sure you're not just doing an all-purpose fertilizer. Maybe experiment with like a water-soluble bloom booster. In terms of potting mix, a lot of professionals really like things with a lot more organic material in them. And that could be earthworm castings, that could be mushroom compost. I mean, the possibilities, as you said, are really endless. I have started using more of the Espoma organic potting mix. I feel like that's got some more organic material in it. It feels lovely. It drains really well. The Espoma brand is really all about like organic gardening and things that are good for your plants, things that are good for you and good for the environment. So I'm definitely mixing more of that into my day-to-day container gardening. The one thing I caution people against when they're adding more organic material, maybe they're throwing some compost on their container gardens, is that organic material can be so nutrient rich. It actually has some color to it, right? So it's not kind of this washed out medium that a lot of potting mixes are. So if you have a brand new limestone patio and you have a planter and you're not, you water that planter religiously, you take really great care of it. If you're not paying attention to the water that's draining out, and if it is sitting on your patio, it can, on occasion, stain that hardscape. So it's just a word of caution. I don't try anything new without paying close attention to it.
Well, you obviously are an expert on all of this. You are certainly very helpful just in this conversation. So, we want to encourage people to go to your website. I know you touched on your courses, but were there additional resources you wanted people to be aware of that they could find there?
Yeah, so in addition to my courses, I have a blog where I write about, it could be anything from what's inspiring me in the garden, some new products that I like. I have a trends blog for 2025 that talks about all these different landscaping trends and how I see people or how I would incorporate those into my container gardens. So if you're just kind of stuck creatively and need some good ideas, I have lots of blogs, a lot of stuff about window boxes. I'm a huge fan of window boxes. So there's even, planting diagrams in some of those, how to pick the right size, how to pick the right style, or all sorts of stuff like that. And planter recipes too. So I think between my online courses, my blogs, my planter recipes, hopefully those types of things will, help people start to see kind of how I think, how I approach container gardens. And then kind of once you see, it's very kind of formulaic. All you have to do is change out the plants from season to season. You can kind of use the same shape, use the same layout, but just use different plants from spring to summer to winter. Yeah, I think it's such a great hobby. I think it's a great way to get your hands in the dirt. I think it's great stress relief. When you sign up for my email newsletter, my emails are coming from me. I answer them. So if you have questions, you can email me.
Absolutely. Well, we'll certainly encourage them to. Like I said, we'll link everything that was mentioned today. I will even be listening through again because you touched on some really great specific names of things. So we'll make sure those are linked as well. Steph, I just thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. This has been so helpful. And now I'm giddier than ever for the sunshine and warm weather and to get out there in the garden and plant.
That's perfect. It's exactly what I want to hear. Thank you so much. It's been an honor to be part of this. I love what you're doing. I love this podcast. I love your Instagram feed. So thank you for all the inspiration.
Of course, likewise.